In this session, we focus on the GoNano methodology for co-creation. We will cover each of the design steps in the co-creation process, explaining their structure, the applied methods, and the logic behind them. As stated in previous sessions, the overall goal of the GoNano-project was to demonstrate how responsiveness to societal values, needs, and concerns can be built into nanotechnology research and innovation processes through co-creation, resulting in products that are socially desirable, sustainable, and acceptable. In order to achieve this, the project developed a methodology for a co-creation process and ran 3 pilot studies within the respective themes of health, food, and energy to test and demonstrate it in practice. The GoNano co-creation methodology was designed as a continuous and iterative process with several rounds of citizen and stakeholder involvement through workshops and consultations. It began with face-to-face citizen workshops aiming at collecting knowledge on the citizens' wishes, concerns, and messages regarding the development and implementation of future nanotechnology. The second round of workshops were for stakeholders within businesses, policy, civil society organizations, and research institutions. Here the needs and values deduced from the first round of citizen workshops were used as the basis for the stakeholders to develop and design responsive suggestions for the applications of nanotechnology. To ensure the inclusion of their perspective, some of the citizens that participated in the previous citizen workshops were also to be actively involved in the stakeholder workshop. The third round was an online consultation where citizens across Europe were to react to the design suggestions developed by the stakeholders in the previous round. In the final round of workshops, the stakeholders were invited back to evaluate the results from the citizen consultation and explore product suggestions aligned with societal needs and values. Now that we have presented the overall design of the entire co-creation process, we'll go through each of these steps in greater detail. In the citizen workshops, the first type of event and step in the co-creation process, the citizens came together to commonly reflect on nanotechnology and to provide their views about how to possibly integrate them into the development of ideas for future applications of nanotechnology that would be aligned with citizens' needs and values. The approach builds on the participatory integration of citizens to opine on pressing issues from projects such as Worldwide Views, PACITA, and co-creative exercises as developed in the project NanoDioid. Prior to the workshop, the citizens were provided with information material to prepare them. The purpose of the information material was to present the citizens with short and easy to understand information about nanotechnology, align the discussion in the meetings with the research and innovation priorities with professional stakeholders, introduce visions of future nanotechnology in health, energy and food, introduce societal, cultural, legal and ethical questions and uncertainties, and finally to illustrate dilemmas of use in relation to everyday life situations in 2030. We developed various scenarios of use to collect up on the analysis of future visions of nanotechnology applications and on questions on acceptability, sustainability and desirability. The scenarios take an everyday life situation as a starting point to illustrate how the nanotechnologies could be implanted in the future. The scenarios take the promise of the technology vision for granted. To introduce questions of desirability, sustainability, and acceptability, each of the scenarios play with how human, societal, and cultural dynamics influence the way technologies can become integrated in and part of people's lives. To exemplify this, we will now show a video that presents one of the scenarios.
Sophia turns on the body sensor app and holds her breath for a few seconds as it updates. No signs of cancer, yet. Sophia thinks of her mother. She died of breast cancer 7 years ago. If only her mother's cancer had developed 5 years later, she would most likely have survived. Since the development of cancer treatments enhanced with nanotechnology, very few die from breast cancer, and no one has to suffer from the terrible side effects of the outdated chemotherapies and radiotherapies of the past. Today, They use tiny nanobots to transport the therapeutic agents directly to the tumor, so that patients do not need to have their entire body bombarded with chemicals and radiation. Tiny nanosensors are installed in the breast tissue of cancer patients that keep track of how they react to the treatment. Sophia fights the temptation to check the body sensor app. The app is a safety net, but also a daily reminder that one day the figures might not be as she hoped. And what if the app doesn't detect everything? What if someone hacks into her phone, changes the settings, or reads her data? Before the nanosensors were installed, Sophia didn't think much about cancer. Now she thinks about it all the time.
The citizen workshops were structured in the following way. After a general introduction clarifying the roles of the participants and introducing the day, the workshop consisted of 3 repetitive rounds of reflection, where the citizens discussed a specific technology application setting, which they might already know from the information material they were provided. The discussions were free, but a facilitator helped to make sure that participants stayed on topic and also discussed a set of pre-prepared questions. The technology-oriented start provides an opportunity to investigate a stakeholder-coined technology setting and creatively dive into opportunities and concerns about nanotechnologies. Starting with a reflection on the application of nanotechnologies also serves to make sure that the citizens have enough time to get familiar with the nano applications and their implications, and that their own thoughts relate to the areas of interests of the stakeholders. In the next step, the citizens were asked to again reflect on the same application of nanotechnology and to identify wishes and concerns that are important to them in that context. They wrote down these wishes and concerns, and after a plenary presentation, the participants voted upon them individually. In doing so, they provide valuable information on how they perceive the acceptability and desirability of nanotechnology applications for the next step of the co-creation process. In the final step of the citizen workshop, citizens were asked to think about what they would like decision makers, researchers, and other professional stakeholders to do. The results were written messages with a clear addressee. Messages could be concrete proposals of a next generation of nanotechnology applications or products, a concrete instruction of what the decision makers should take care of, or what the researchers should consider in the future when they elaborate on these technologies. This format, which is reminiscent of recommendation writing, is well elaborated and have been tested in numerous participatory technology assessment projects. The outcome we gained from the citizen workshops were threefold. A ranked list of wishes and concerns directly received from the participants, clear ideas around the issue of nanotechnology development addressed to specific actor groups, and results from the analysis, which was done by the partners, with regards to underlying needs, preferences, and values of citizens. The second step in the co-creation process was the first stakeholder workshops. The task for the participants of the stakeholder workshop was to identify and evaluate how future products can align with the expressed wishes and concerns from the citizen workshops and the translated needs and values of citizens. To ensure the incorporation of the citizens' perspective and to amplify the co-creation aspects of the methodology, some citizens were also to be actively involved in the stakeholder workshop. Stakeholders were invited based on their background in nanotechnology, the thematic areas of food, energy and health, the application areas, or all 3 subjects. The participating stakeholders included both researchers, policymakers, CSOs, industry and businesses. The level of knowledge on nanotechnology, its application areas and regulatory issues varied among the stakeholders. We therefore developed and provided them with background information material about these topics to make sure that every participant would have a basic level of knowledge before participating in the workshop. In addition, the provided material also explained the organization and aim of the citizen workshop, followed by an explanation of the outcomes of it. Furthermore, it emphasized the use, importance, and urgency of stakeholder engagement and the potential value of including societal needs and values in the development of nanotechnologies. All stakeholder workshops followed a similar structure featuring 4 interrelated sessions. An exploration session where participants got to know each other and their work and explore the needs and values expressed by the citizens as well as their own needs and interests. An ideation session where participants imagined and co-created responses to the needs and values expressed by the citizens by imagining revisions or adaptations of ongoing research and innovation trajectories, building on the varied expertise around the table. A prototyping session where participants generated a storyboard that visualized how the resulting research lines and product suggestions could be designed or modified in relation to the needs and values expressed by the citizens, and suggested concrete actions to be taken by the stakeholders present to realize this vision. A reflection session where participants presented and reframed their storyboards, reflected on the ways in which the citizens' needs shaped the storyboards, identified actions to be taken in preparation for the next workshop, and reflected on the overall workshop objectives. The outcome of the stakeholder workshop were research lines and product suggestions. These would be used as input for the next event in the co-creation process, the online citizen consultations. For others wanting to set up a co-creation process, we recommend to make sure that the composition of the stakeholder groups remains as similar as possible between stakeholder workshops, in case you have more than one event, in order to provide continuity of ideas, encourage uptake of ideas, and provide input for participants to commit to developing joint outcomes after the co-creation events. We also recommend that you provide stakeholders with a meaningful process by informing them of the overall aim and perhaps limitations of the process, thus acknowledging their own role as well as the role of citizens in the overall task of co-creation. Additionally, it has to be made very clear that potentially critical viewpoints are also most welcome, as these help shape the process in desirable ways. The third step in the co-creation process was an online citizen consultation. We developed an online survey to broadly evaluate the outcome of the 2 first steps in the co-creation process. The research lines and suggested products formulated by stakeholders were broken down into concrete examples with regards to potential daily life context of citizens in the near future. The online consultation gave all citizens, including those that participated in the citizen workshop, the chance to see how their messages, wishes, and concerns were taken up. The overall aim of this step was to ensure a coherent nanotechnology development in 3 thematic fields that were compatible with public desirability and preferences. The target group of this step was the broad public, including citizens from the first citizen workshop. As the online consultation addressed lay people, it needed to be easily accessible to this target group. In order to avoid lengthy polls, the consultation was developed so that 10 to 15 minutes were sufficient to provide the answer. The overall aim of the online consultation was to find out more about the wider perception of nanotechnology in general and to compare and prioritize the product suggestions from the first 2 steps in the co-creation process. The survey was set up to address 3 learning goals. Firstly, a thematic analysis was used for the qualitative part of this study, consisting of the question, what comes to mind first when you hear the word nanotechnology, with results visualized in word clouds. Secondly, needs and values from the citizen workshops were again prioritized. Thirdly, standardized vignettes, small contextualized stories, were used to illustrate 5 concrete product suggestions or research aims that resulted from the collaboration between citizens and stakeholders from each of the pilot countries. In the 4th and final step of the co-creation process, the second stakeholder workshops, the participating stakeholders were asked to reflect on the outcome of the process so far and the results of the online consultation to evaluate their potential to be realized and to provide input for the development of business cases and concrete design suggestions. Like the first stakeholder workshops, the program was structured around the 4 main pillars of co-creation: exploration, ideation, prototyping, and reflection. The exploration session aimed to present the overall co-creation process in detail, introduce concrete product suggestions derived from the first stakeholder workshop, and input from the citizen consultations functioning as enabling conditions for further development of the product suggestions. In the ideation session, participants were divided in subgroups where each of the product suggestions were presented in further detail. The subgroup discussions were moderated by a table facilitator who presented statements from discussions. These statements should encourage an action-oriented perspective to prepare participants for the next session. In the prototyping session, participants defined a specific action plan in subgroups with next steps to integrate societal considerations in the further development of the product suggestions. The concluding reflection session aimed to consider broader reflective questions about the feasibility of the action plan, the integration of citizen perspectives, and the opportunities and barriers of the co-creation process. In this session, we went through the GoNano co-creation methodology and covered the structure of and method used for each of the steps in the co-creation process. This illustrated how both the co-creation process and different types of events within it can be designed to involve and engage participating stakeholders and citizens. In the following sessions, we will focus on the practical planning aspects of organizing co-creation events and recruiting participants for them.